All right, so your bell ringer is checked off. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get into our guided notes. What are we going to learn today? Today, I can explain the interconnected relationship between surface water and groundwater. So, yep, we're talking about water. Today, we're going to hit up the water cycle. Today's going to be pretty easy. I am going to throw new terms at you, but most of them they're pretty easy to get down. Their definitions are exactly as they sound. So, like I said, we're going to talk about the water cycle. So we've seen another cycle before. We've seen the rock cycle. So it's going to be very similar to that on how it works, how we have one type of water that can move into another type, that can move into another type. And yeah, it's going to be great. Can't wait. Now, you might be thinking, isn't water just water? What are you even talking about? So we're going to talk about the different forms that water can take. So you know about oceans, you have those big bodies of water. Water can also come down as precipitation, which is just a fancy way of saying rain or snow or sleet. And you may have known this, you may not have known this, but clouds are actually just water in a different form. So the actual number or amount of water present on our earth and in the sky actually never changes. So when it rains, we don't just have more water, okay? It's just coming down in a different form. So the amount of water never changes. Now, just like the rock cycle, the cycle has to be driven by something because, again, change isn't always fun. Change isn't easy. It's easier just to stay the same. So something is going to make that water change its form. And in this case, it's going to be the sun. How nice. So the sun is what is going to drive the water cycle. So let's stop just talking about it and actually get into it. So what I have here is part of the water cycle, and then over here are our terms. And instead of having you fill it in twice, I'm just going to have you fill it in the water cycle and then two super important things over here. So as a reminder for cycles, we know the most important thing to look at a cycle is, that's right, the arrows. I know you said it. So you want to look at the arrows because where it starts is what the starting item is, and where it points to is what it is becoming. And the word beside the arrows is what is actually occurring to cause that change to happen. Okay, so let's start with what I think is probably the easiest, that precipitation. That is when water goes from being in a cloud form and it moves into precipitation, which we know as rain, freezing rain, so snow, sleet, hail, any type of precipitation that is falling from the sky. So precipitation. So we're going from the sky to the ground. Pretty easy. So now we have a bunch of water on the ground. Then what happens? So there are actually two different directions water can go once it's on the ground. One is that evaporation, which I think we've probably heard of before, and the other is that transpiration, which might be a new word to us. So evaporation is when water from the surface turns into water vapor after being heated up by the sun. So water vapor, think of when you take like a really hot shower and you get a bunch of steam. That steam is still water, it's just heated up. That's exactly what water vapor is. So water on the surface is going to be heated up. So water in like a river, lake, ocean, pond, it's going to be heated up and taken up to the sky. You can't really see it happen usually. It's usually not that hot, but it's happening, believe it or not. So over here, we've got evaporation because we have the arrow pointing from the water up to the sky. Now, not all water that's going to go up to the sky is going to come from a big body of water like your river, your ocean, your lake. The other way it can get back up to the sky is that transpiration. And this is when plants will actually release water from their leaves. So if you have a plant, it's also going to get heated up by the sun. And then those leaves, you may have seen this before, sometimes leaves on different plants or trees or whatever are going to get some water droplets on them. And those are eventually going to heat up and go up to the sky. It sounds crazy, but it's true. So here we have, I keep moving myself all over the place, transpiration. So again, water, once it's down on Earth, can either go back up through evaporation meaning it comes from surface water, or transpiration, meaning it comes from trees. I think the easiest way to remember the difference between evaporation and transpiration is transpiration starts with a T, so think T for trees. Transpiration happens with trees and other plants, and evaporation is the other one. Pretty simple. Okay, one last part on this cycle I want us to fill in is something called condensation. So once that water vapor, or that, if you want to think of steam, I'm okay with that. If you think of that water vapor turning back into liquid water and forming clouds. So instead of just like this mysterious vapor that we can't see, it eventually turns into a cloud, which you can see. That is condensation. So we'll put that right here. Condensation. An easy way to remember that clouds are forming with condensation is clouds and condensation both start with a C. See how easy this is? Oh my gosh. So again, since this is a cycle, it just keeps going and going and going. So eventually, after condensation happens, you have those rain clouds, and then eventually the water in those clouds will come back down as precipitation. And the whole process just repeats. Pretty easy. Okay. We've got 4 more terms I want to throw at you that are often used with the water cycle, and these are, believe it or not, even easier, I think. So, a lot of these terms we're going to be very familiar with because you see it constantly, sometimes daily. So first, if you have a whole lot of precipitation, think like it is raining nonstop all day, and you get that buildup often on the side of the street of just running water, usually going toward like a storm drain. So you have an excessive amount, an extra amount of water just running off on the surface. We call that runoff. So we're going to put that right over here. Run off. So you can see that rain is coming down. In this case, we're on like a big hill or a mountain. That rain's coming down and it's building up and it's forming almost like a stream. So that is that runoff pictured right here. Now this runoff often leads to what we call surface water. So surface water, we'll put it right over here, surface water, is just water on Earth's surface. Surface water. Easy. This is talking about like your actual big bodies of water that don't really go away. You can think of, when it rains a lot, sometimes you get puddles, but those puddles aren't permanent, right? They eventually evaporate, there's that word, go back up to the sky and disappear. Where surface water, they're there forever. You can think of Sardis Lake. Sardis Lake doesn't just appear when it rains and then disappears after it stops raining. No, it's there all the time. So your runoff, that excessive rain, does often lead into surface water. So your big bodies of water. Okay, 2 more terms. So when you have, I have no idea where to put myself for this. We'll put me right there. When you have a lot of extra runoff or extra surface water, sometimes it can actually move somewhere else again. Kind of crazy. So if you have a lot of water, especially on top of some soil or just dry piece of land, it can go through this process called infiltration. So this is when any of that extra water will actually seep down into the soil. So the water will actually go down into the ground. So right here we see that arrow pointing from this water going down into the ground. That is our infiltration. You may have heard the word infiltrate before. Usually you talk about like an army infiltrating something. That just means entering, basically. So the water is entering the soil. Now, the last part, where is that water going once it's in the soil? What happens? This might blow your mind a little bit. So hang on. We have underneath the Earth's surface bodies of water. Kind of weird. Underneath the soil in many places is what we call groundwater. Let me label it. Groundwater. Which again, pretty easy to remember because it's water in the ground. Groundwater. How easy. So underneath a bunch of rocks and crevices and those pores that the water goes through is a big body of water called the groundwater. Now this is where we often get water from wells. That's where it comes from. If you're ever like Where is this water coming from? What the heck? It's just coming from nowhere? It's coming from your groundwater. So, runoff is when you have that excessive precipitation, often after it rains, and it goes into often surface water. And if it's left over on top of soil, it can seep into that soil, which is called infiltration, and enter that big, larger body of water called groundwater. And then here on this last slide, you can see all of these words together. So that precipitation when it rains, surface runoff running into that surface water, which can then evaporate, or if that excessive water is on the trees, it can go through transpiration. That's not on this picture, but you know about it. And then once that water vapor is in the air, it can turn into clouds through condensation. And of course, you have that excessive water over here going through infiltration, becoming groundwater. So that's pretty much it for the water cycle. I know a few more terms, but I think most of them are pretty straightforward, so not too tough of a day. We'll practice this tomorrow. If you have any questions, you know where to find me.